students, this is lecture number 4, and this one's going to be fairly short, but I think it's going to have a little bit, it's kind of difficult material just because a lot of these things sound similar to one another, but they're very different. And so just paying attention to what the actual term is and what it means is going to be very important here, okay? So we're going to look at just 5 different terms here and what they mean. So the first term has to do with geodatabases. So if you remember, there's 2 types of geodatabases. There's file and personal. File geodatabases, they have no storage limit, but they cannot be edited using Microsoft Access. Where personal geodatabases have a storage limit, but you can edit them with database software such as Microsoft Access. The extension for the file geodatabase is .gdb. The extension for the personal geodatabase is .mdb. And like we had talked about, geodatabases are just a container. They're like a file cabinet. And inside your file cabinet, you can have pieces of paper, which would be your feature classes. So you can import a shapefile into the geodatabase. It'll then no longer be a shapefile. Geodatabases do not contain shapefiles. But once it's inside the geodatabase, it becomes a geodatabase feature class, and it can be stored directly in the geodatabase. But most people don't just throw pieces of paper in their file cabinet. Most people put folders in their file cabinet, and that is actually similar to what you can do with a geodatabase, where you can include what's called a feature data set. Okay, so right here, a feature data set. So a feature data set is not, it's not a feature class. It's simply like a folder that can hold feature classes. And what's really cool about these is that the feature classes within the feature data set, you can do a lot of pretty advanced analysis with them. So you can do what's called set up rules of topology, and those rules of topology would then apply to each of the feature classes that are inside the feature data set. So what is a rule of topology? Well, if you know, if you just think a little bit about something like tax lots or parcels, so land ownership cannot overlap. Okay, so you have one piece of land that has an owner, and then you have a piece of land that's adjacent to it that has an owner. So you shouldn't have overlaps, and you shouldn't have gaps in your land ownership. And so you can set that as a rule for multiple feature classes to follow, and then the software will actually flag that where it's violated, and then you can go and fix those. That's just one example. You can set it for overpasses and underpasses and where streams cross roads, and pretty much any rule you can think about for how 2 feature classes spatially should relate to one another, you can set up with a rule of topology, and those 2 feature classes just need to be in the same feature data set for that rule to then apply. We're not going to end up doing that in this class, but you will do it in later classes. And it's important to know that you can do that. It's actually a pretty neat function of a feature data set. All right, so that's what a feature data set is. It's just like a folder inside a geodatabase that can hold feature classes, and you don't need them. We're not using them thus far in the class. We just have our feature classes directly inside our geodatabases, but they are something that can be used, and they're very powerful. Okay, so now we're going to look at what's called a layer. So the layer, we've already seen these. These are where in your map underneath your data frame, you can just add your feature classes to your table of contents. And then what happens is that creates what's called a layer, and that layer will have a rule for symbolizing that feature class, and then a pointer. It points to where that feature class is stored. So if you move the feature class itself, it'll break that connection, and you'll end up with a red exclamation point next to your layer. So the layers themselves are not feature classes. They simply point to the feature class, because remember, your map document doesn't contain actual geospatial data. It just contains the rules for symbolizing those data and then the pointers to those data. So that's just called a layer, where it's stored inside the map. We've seen those a lot. But what if we wanted to store that layer outside of the map? So say that I really like the way my roads are symbolized, and let's say I had a friend named Ethan, because that's a great name, and he wanted to take my symbolized roads and add them to his map. Well, I could store those outside the map in what's called a layer file. And so we did this in the TBF, where we actually created a layer file, and they're .lyr. And all it is a layer that's stored outside of a map. So as long as you have access to the data itself, it's on your computer, it's on a server that you have access to, you can use the layer file. They're really handy. Now, if I email it to somebody and they don't have access to the data, it will not work because it does not contain the data. It's simply a pointer and my symbolizing rules. Okay, so that's what a layer file is. A layer package.lpk is a layer file that also contains the data. And so what happens is you save your layer package outside the map, and then it bundles up both the layers and the feature classes for those data into a package. And then you could send that to somebody, and then they can unpack it, and then they'll have both the layer and the actual feature classes used to create that layer. So that's really handy. We then also have what's called a map package. So this is where if I really like my entire map document, I can share it as a map package, and it'll get all bundled up, and it'll have both the map itself and the data used in the map will be part of this bundle. So I could even email that to somebody. They can then unpack it, and they'll have my map and my data. And so to do that, you simply just go to File and then Share as Map Package, and then the software itself will bundle everything together for you, and then you can share it with somebody else, or you can save it onto a thumb drive and move it at that point, and it won't break any links if you move it. So all of these have their different purposes. They're all very powerful, but just knowing which ones contain data, which ones don't, is really important, especially for tests. And so layers and layer files do not contain data, and then it's just kind of a rule of thumb that if it has the term package in it, that means it also contains the data. So the layer package and the map package, the .mpk, contains actual data inside the package. Okay, so I hope that makes sense to you guys. If you have any questions, just shoot me an email and just give this lecture a view and use it to study for the midterm when that comes around. And I hope you guys are staying healthy and having a good week, and I will talk to you later. Salt under my boots. Salt is this road.